Hello guys, so welcome back to another video in the tutorial series for making a bug tracker with React. Today we're going to be making the login screen to go along with our Redux slices that we made in our last tutorial. So if we go into our view folder and make another folder and we'll call it login, and inside the login folder we just want a file which is login.jsx, and we'll have a login CSS. So inside the JSX we need to bring in React. If you don't know how to use React, then basically you just need to import React from React, but the React that we're importing has to have a capital. React's library won't actually pick up the import otherwise. And then we need to export default, and we will make a arrow function, and inside the arrow function we'll just have a return. Inside the return we're going to have a div, and the div will have a class name of, let's call this login bg for background. Then inside the div we're going to have a form and give that a class name of login panel. And then we'll have a title, so we'll have a h1 and we'll just call it login. And then we need an input, and the input we're going to give a name, and it will just be the person's name, so just call that name. The type will default to text, so we don't have to worry about that. We'll put a placeholder and we'll put name, and then we're going to have an onValue change, or an onChange, and we'll leave that blank for now because we don't have a function to push that to. And then we'll have to set the value, and we'll leave that blank as well for now. And then we need another input for the password. So for speed I'm just going to copy and paste, and we're going to change the name to password and the placeholder to password. And we want to change the type of this input, so it hides the text rather than actually showing us what it is, so we'll just set the type to password as well. And then the last thing we need is a button. So we'll have a button, and that will be type of submit. That will have an onClick, which we'll leave blank for now because we don't have that implemented. And then we'll just put login for the text. Okay, so now we've got the basic HTML elements on the page, we need to implement so we can actually get the inputs that the user puts in to the input fields. So we need to bring in a couple of things. We need to bring in use state from React, and this is the new hook version of their state management. We need to import, and this will be coming from React Redux, and this will be implementing our Redux into our login, and we'll be using use dispatch. And then what we want to do is we need to import the action from our slice that we created. So if we go find our Redux slice for authentication, we need to import sign in. So first of all we need to initialize the dispatch from Redux. We'll put a constant dispatch and make sure it's inside the export default, and that equals use dispatch, and call it as a function. And then we need to make some state inside of this component so we can manage the values of the inputs, and then when they're submitted we can send it to our action in Redux. We're going to make a constant, and we are going to declare it as an array, and we're going to have form input, and then we'll have another one called set form input, and this will equal use state, and then we need to declare what the state is going to be. So do curly brackets, and inside the curly brackets we're going to have name, and we'll just set that to an empty string, and we'll have password, which will be an empty string as well. Now we've got our local state inside of the component, we can create a function which will handle the input changed, and this takes a parameter which will be the component that actually fires it. It will be passing in the data, so we'll just put E for event, and inside here we can now set the form input, and that will be brackets curly brackets, and we don't want to overwrite the form input if, say, we've already set name and we're about to set password. So instead what we need to do is, if we go 3 dots and we'll put form input, now that basically sets the input as the previous input already. So now we need to get the event target, so this will be the input that triggers that event. So we want to use it as a key. Now, to use a non-string key or a non-value key, we need to put it into array brackets. Inside the array bracket we go E for the event.target.name. So now whatever triggers this function it will be passing in all of this information, and we can get the name. So it will use name as the value, the key, so it will match it up there. And then we can set the value to e.target.value, so that will get whatever's being put inside the input. So now that is going to set the local state, but now we need to use the local state and actually send it to our Redux action. So if we make another function, and we'll call this submit, now this will take an event again, and then to call the action from Redux they use a thing called dispatch, and it basically dispatches the action that we require the library to do. And because we've declared it up there, if we type in dispatch, and we have to pass in the action that we've imported, so that will be sign in, and you pass it in as a function, and that will go ahead and dispatch the action when we submit. But we need to pass a payload into it, and the payload is going to be the state that we've set, so we could just pass in form input, and that will pass in name and password as a object. And if you go into the auth slice, you see that that is what we're destructuring inside of our slice. So now we've got that, the last couple of things we have to do is, the normal way of submitting a form can't be used in React, because when you submit it, it automatically refreshes a page, which is not what you want to do in React, because it sort of defeats the whole object. So the event we need to get, which is going to be the button, and that it'll be sending over the form, we need to prevent default, and that basically just prevents the page from actually reloading itself. So what we've got to do now is, on the on change, we'll just put the input changed, and we'll do that for both. And the value, we want to have it as a managed value. We want to pass in the state for that value. So if we put form input, we'll put name, and form input, password. And then for the on click on the button, we'll just use the function for submit. Okay, so now we've actually created this component, we need to import it into the app so we can actually use it. So if you go over to the app.js and we will import, and you can call it whatever you want. I'm going to call it login, but you've got to make sure it's a capital so React can distinguish between HTML components and its own components. And we'll import it from views, login, login. And then you just put it in like a HTML component, login, and it's a self-closing component. So now if we save that and we do npm start, so we can start our development server, and it should open up in the browser with no errors. Okay, so now we've got a very basic unstyled version, and we can just type in whatever and click login. Now you won't see what that's doing. Just to give you an idea what React and Redux is actually doing, if we open up our auth slice and inside sign-in, if we just console.log and we'll log the state, save that, let that recompile and come back in. Now if we go into view in the Chrome developer tools and open that up, I recommend using Chrome developer tools for any web development because it makes life so much easier to debug, especially for CSS. So if we just type in anything and click login, we should be getting the state back into our console. They've structured it so the true is logged in and the I is the admin for false. Now that's just what Redux is actually doing underneath the surface. You don't really need to worry about that because we can actually grab it at a later date when we need it. So if we go back in, and we'll just delete the console log because we don't need that, and we will start styling this login because we don't really want it like that. It looks a little bit basic. We want to set a couple global things rather than have it locally set for the login. So if we go into our index CSS, and we will use HTML, so it's for the whole HTML document. Now, I'm going to set this now because we're going to have a sidebar in our dashboard, and we're going to want all of our page to be pushed over so that it doesn't sit underneath the sidebar itself. Now to do that, we're just going to do a margin left, and we're going to set this at a 20% VW. Now VW is view width, if you don't know. And we're going to set a couple variables inside CSS. Now to set a variable, you do 2 hyphens, and we're going to call this prime color, and we're just setting that so we can use it at a later date throughout the whole application, so we don't have to continuously go through and change different colors separately. Now I've chosen my color I want to use for the application. You don't have to use this one. If you go to colorhunt.com, and that can generate some color palettes for you to use if you don't want to use the colors I'm using. So I'm going to use 264E70 for my primary color, and then because we're using quite dark colors in this application, I'm going to set all text, all color, so the text color, to white. And then that should be it at the moment for our global CSS. So if we go back into our login CSS and we grab the class for login background. So inside our login background, we're going to make it 100% width or 100 view width, and then the height we're going to have as 105, just so it has of the height VH, just so it has a bit of an overrun. So now we've got that. If we set the background and we'll set a URL, now we're going to have an image here. So create a folder in your source and we'll just call that images, and I'm going to bring over an image I've chose earlier. So I've got a nice background image. I will upload this, or you can choose your own So we will bring that in to our application. Let's find where it is, images, and then what I call it, image background.jpg. So now we've got our background, we need to size it. So if we grab background size and we're going to want to cover, so it covers the whole background of the whole screen, sorry. And then if I save that and we go have a look now, oh, can compile, why can't compile? Can't resolve images. There you go. So if we save that and we go and have a look, you'll see we've got the background and it does fit the page, but you see we've got margin at the top and we've got this 20% margin to the left. So if we do margin left and we do minus 20 VW, that will kick it back to its default. And the margin that is currently set around the picture is the default that is set inside of browsers. So we're going to need to pull this back to minus 20.6, and the margin top we are going to do minus 27 pixels, and that'll pull it right up into the top. So we've got a nice looking login page, but we want to change this login quite dramatically. So now we've got a nice looking background. We don't want to have it quite so bright. So if we set the background color, and we'll just set this to black for now. Now, if you save that, that's not going to do anything to the background. So we need to set the background blend mode and set this to multiply. So now if you do that, you should have a black background because it's trying to put a solid black into it. So if we just hover over the black color and we'll bring down the alpha, you'll see now it's darkened down our image, maybe a bit too dark, so we'll just go a little bit less. And then we want to set the background attachment to fixed, so it stays in one place. And then save that, and we've got a nice looking login page. So now we want to style the logging panel. So let's bring in the login panel class, and I want the background of this login panel to be the primary color that we've just declared inside of our index.css. And to use variables inside CSS, you do var, and then inside some brackets you just put the name of the variable, prime color, and if we save that, we should get, there you go, it's going right across because it's block filled, and you've got a primary color. Now, and now we don't want it to go all the way across. If we set a width, and let's call that 30 VW, and we're going to have a border of 1 pixel, and we'll set it to solid and set it to grey. And then we want to have some rounded edges, so border radius, and we'll have 5 pixels worth of rounded edges. If we go have a look at that, so you've now got 30% and some rounded edges, because it's still sat in the top corner. So we're going to set a margin, and we'll set the margin to 25 VH, and we'll set the left and right to auto so it sits at center, Now you can see that it's moving the background down. Now we don't want the background to move down, so we'll set the position to absolute. And you see now it's jumped straight back up to the top. Now this is still looking a bit shabby. We don't want it to look that bad. So the next thing we want to do is we want to align what's actually inside of it, and we're going to use display flex. And we need to define the flex wrap property so it wraps around rather than everything being in a line. And we want the content inside of the box to be centralized, so we'll do justify content to the center. We'll save that, and now you can see that still not looking good because the size of the H1 and the size of the inputs are still allowing it to fit on one line rather than actually wrapping it. We need to do a couple of things. We need to get the login panel H1, and inside the H1 we just want to set the width to 100%. So it's 100% of its parent panel, and in that way nothing will be allowed to sit beside it. And now it's pushed the inputs down. Now we want the text in the H1 to sit central. So in the panel we'll do text align and put that in the center. And then to fix the inputs, we'll grab the inputs from the login panel and we'll set a width. So we can set the width to 70% because we don't want it too big. And we will set the height to 30 pixels, I reckon, 30 pixels. So if we have a look at that. So now, the button's going to need to wrap down, but the button's not going to be that small anyway, so we'll leave that for now. So now these inputs are looking a lot better, but we want to style them a bit and give them a bit of a gap between them. So we're going to make the border have a rounded border, and we don't actually want any border color. If we go and get the border radius, and we'll set that to 5 pixels, we'll get the border, and we'll set that to none. And then to make a bit of a gap, we'll have a margin of 10 pixels. Now they're looking quite stylish, and we're getting a gap between them all. The text is sitting a little bit too close to the left hand side for my liking, so if we do a padding of left, and we'll set that to 5 pixels, just to pull it over a little bit more. We need to style this login button. I'm going to be using the login button throughout the whole application. We're going to want to define the button itself, and I want to have it global. So if we go into the index.css and I want to set all the buttons inside of the whole entire project, now I want to set a background. It's going to be a color. I'm going to have EF6C57, nice orange color. And then we're going to want a border radius, round off the edges, set that to 5 pixels. I'm going to have a padding to adjust the size inside of it, and I want to have 5 pixels top and bottom, 20 pixels left and right. I'm going to set the text color to white, not like it matters because I've actually defined it above, but I'll do it anyway. I'll set the font to normal, bold, 18 pixels, and then it'll be open sans, and I'll let the browser define that, and it will be sans serif. Then we'll just do text align and put it in the center. So we've got a nice little button. We're going to want a bit of padding at the margin at the bottom just to push it away from the bottom. So let's go margin bottom, And we'll just push it away by 10 pixels. So now we've got a nice gap at the bottom. Now at the moment, when you go over it, we don't have any hover effect. So if we create a hover effect for button, now to do that, you do button, and we put a pseudo class, which is ... and you put hover. And inside here, we're going to set the background color, or the background, and we're just going to make it a little bit darker. So we'll do, what color should I do? 9C3829, just to make it a bit of a darker orange. And we don't want this to instantly change color, so we're going to make a transition. So if we do transition, and we'll set it to all, and we need to set a time period, so I'm going to do 0.3 seconds, and that just defines how long it takes to change between the two colors. Go back, and you see we've got a nice little hover effect. For now, that will be our login page, and that will log us in a second, but we need to grab the logged in state to be able to display this. So you don't want the login page to be displayed if you're already logged in for obvious reasons. So to do that, inside of our app.js, where we're rendering the logging component itself, we're going to want to bring in Redux. So we'll import from React Redux, and we're going to want to bring in a thing called use selector. Now this is the hook that is inside of it, so we can grab the data in the state itself. So now we've imported that, we need to create a constant, and this will be a destructuring constant, and we need to destructure the use selector, grab the state inside the use selector with an arrow function just to return the state. We have to destructure it because it's inside of several parts, as when we defined it in index.js, we've put auth, bug, and user. They are going to be the keys inside of the state itself. Back in our app.js, we want to grab the auth from state so we can actually define whether or not we are logged in or not. And inside our return, we only want to render the login when we aren't logged in. So if we do a conditional in the return, you need to do curly brackets around everything that you want to declare as any sort of functionality inside of the return. So we're going to grab the auth, and then we're going to go dot logged in, and that is basically what we've declared inside the state in auth slice. And then we're going to go question mark. Now we want to know if this is going to be true or false. Now at the moment it's going to render login page if we are logged in, so we don't want to do that. So to change that, we'll just put an exclamation mark at the front. It's now asking whether or not it's not true. So if it's not logged in, we're going to render the login page, and then we need to do ... and we are going to render a h1 that just says hello. Now we're not going to see that very well just because it's white, but it's just going to give us a rough idea of what this is doing. So if we save that, and we go over to our login page, now it doesn't matter what we put in because it's always returning true. Login, go to our developer tools, just so you can actually see the h1. So there's the h1, and we're logged in. So now we're successfully logging in. For now, I'm just going to put a empty element in here just so it doesn't throw an error, because we don't want it to say hello world. So I hope you learned something new in this tutorial, guys. In our next tutorial, we will be implementing the sidebar into our application and bringing in all the components so we can start displaying the bugs that are being returned from the back end. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.